Hello, everyone, and welcome to this LinkedIn Live on Friday afternoon. Happy Friday to you all, wherever you are in the world. If you're watching this on playback, I hope you find it useful. And if you're watching it live, please feel free to submit any questions that come to your mind as you're hearing the overview of what I have to say. I'm really pleased to be here and really excited to present to you all and to have a really informal discussion about neuro inclusion. It's a subject which is very close to my heart and a topic that I post on every day on LinkedIn. So if you are interested on neurodivergence, autism and ADHD in particular, and neuro inclusion, then please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn via my profile at Kate Esiche. So my name's Kate Esiche. As I've just said, I am a neuro-inclusion navigator. I have about 25 years experience of working in corporate communications, particularly internal communications and employee engagement. And latterly, I have transitioned to being more focused on neuro-inclusion related to neurodivergence. And my whole business is now shaped around helping organizations, supporting leaders, coaching people managers to create neuro-inclusive cultures. And I think it makes sense to start with what I mean by neuro-inclusion. So neuro-inclusion, much like inclusion, is all about involving, inviting, and in making as many people feel welcome as possible. And the neuro part is related to the various neurotypes that exist in our communities and our society across the globe. So there isn't just one type of neuro presentation, there are many. And as I mentioned earlier, autism and ADHD are two of the most pertinent, but there are many more. There's dyslexia, there's dyspraxia, there's dyscalculia, there's ADD too, and many more. And basically, what they do is affect the way that people interact and experience, interact with and experience the world. So it all relates to the way the brain processes information and the way that people socially interact with one another. So in autism in particular, they often describe it as a social deficit condition, but actually it's a different way of communicating. Autistic people can communicate very well, but not necessarily in a way that is considered the industry standard, as I like to call it, the norm, the neurotypical. And you'll hear me talk about neurotypicality that's related to the vast majority of people who think and interact with the world and socialize in very similar ways. Whereas neurodivergence relates to those conditions like autism, ADHD, where social interaction, and the way they experience the world is impacted by the way that their brain works. So neuro-inclusion and neuro-inclusivity is about involving those people who have various neurotypes more in a cultural setting within a workplace. So when we think about diversity and inclusion and equity, we also have to think about neuro-inclusion too. It's often considered a separate topic, but actually it's absolutely part of diversity and inclusion. And we all know that DEI contributes greatly to fostering a culture of engagement and productivity and innovation. So they are pivotal to achieving those things. So today the topic is fostering engagement, innovation, helping that productivity, and neuro-inclusion plays a huge role in that. So I mentioned what neurodivergence is, and I think it's important to understand that there are many facets to neurodivergence. So there's a category that's called neurodivergence, a term, should I say, that's called neurodivergence, and it covers a huge spectrum of conditions and various neurotypes, as I've just outlined. And within each of those conditions, like autism and ADHD, you've got a wide variety of presentations. So why I'm so passionate about neurodivergence is both my children were diagnosed 4 years ago with ADHD and autism. One has both, which is ADHD. And as a result of that, I was forced to quickly become very knowledgeable about neurodivergence, those two conditions in particular, and how they affect individuals. So I know very much from my personal experience that neurodivergence differs greatly from one person to the next, and there's no one size fits all approach. Although, having said that, there are things that you can put in place, actions that you can take, which will help neuro inclusion to take place and to be embedded in your organization. And alongside that, happily also help the rest of your organization to feel the benefit too. And often I hear that, so, everyone can benefit, everyone could do with that. We could all, have a more flexible approach to working. But what I'm talking about with neuro inclusion is specifically involving neurodivergence and welcoming neurodivergence in the workplace. Remembering that neurodivergent people experience the world in very different ways to neurotypical people. And as a result of that, need certain interventions to happen that aren't just nice to have, but actually are night and day to their everyday experience. And so when we talk about neuro inclusion, we are talking specifically, should I say, about neurodivergent employees versus everyone, and making sure that they feel welcome, they feel included, and they are, open to having conversations with others about their experience, and allowed to have those conversations, and involved in a cultural setting that makes it comfortable to have those conversations. So often you'll hear organizations talk about a culture of openness and transparency. But if that is just lip service, then you won't have those authentic conversations. You won't have those stories being told, because people will not feel comfortable unless they truly understand and truly experience that the culture is one of openness and transparency. So there's one thing saying it, but actually making it happen is really pivotal. And as I said, if you have any questions about what I'm saying, as I'm saying it, some of the topics that I'm referring to, or any of the items I'm touching on, please feel free to send me a message. I've had some problems before with LinkedIn Live and receiving messages. Hopefully that won't happen today. So if someone could just send me a quick note or a message to let me know that you're there, and that you can hear me and you can see me. And then that gives me the confidence to know that I can receive questions or comments as and when they're coming in. So I spoke about neurodivergence and what it is, and the various conditions that come under this umbrella term. You're probably thinking to yourself, what role does neuro inclusion play in DEI? And I said before that DEI is often considered to be age, gender, ethnicity, disability, ability, different abilities come under that umbrella. And neurodivergence is perhaps different because it's the so-called hidden disability. Sometimes it isn't so hidden. As I said before, it's a spectrum, particularly autism. So if you are working alongside autistic people or ADHDers, you will definitely see a difference in their manifestations, in their presentation, in their behavior, and it will be unique to them, based on their cultural background at home, the way they've been brought up, their experience of life, their education and training, and so on. There are so many different things that impact neurodivergence, very similar to neurotypicality. You know, if you're a neurotypical person, you won't just appear out of nowhere. You would have been born into a family and shaped and influenced by the people around you in that family and the kind of upbringing you've had. And it's no different for neurodivergent people. So you will have a wide spectrum of presentations, and some people will be very obviously autistic, not necessarily ADHD. I think ADHD is more of a hidden disability, but in some instances autism is not. It's quite obvious when someone is very far along the spectrum, because they were perhaps behaving in a way that helps them to regulate their sensory needs, their emotions, to feel calm and comfortable, especially in a workplace setting, which can be noisy and you know, lots of discussions and conversations going on, lots of machinery, lots of bright lights shining, you know, from the ceiling, which can really dysregulate someone who is autistic. And in that instance, it might be quite obvious that the person is struggling in some way to feel comfortable in that setting. So when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we are talking about age, we are talking about gender, we are talking about ethnicity, and also sexuality. That's the other one I forgot. All of those things are encompassed in DEI, but also that goes alongside neuro-inclusion. So we need to also make neurodiversity and neurodivergence part of the mix. And that's an important point. Actually, the misstep I made just now is something that happens quite often in the general public and society. People will mix the two terms. So neurodiversity relates to the way that different people think. So even within a neurotypical community, you will have variations of thought, different processing styles, different learning styles. And that's neurodiversity. It is related to neurodivergence, but it doesn't specifically relate to conditions like autism, like dyspraxia, dyscalculia, like ADHD. It's just related to the fact that everyone thinks differently. So the entire world is neurodiverse. And if you work in an organization or a company, and you have a team of 6 people, every single one of them, you know, will be neurodiverse. So you've got that neurodiverse makeup within your team, because everyone thinks differently, everyone learns differently. Whereas when you've got neurodivergence at play, what you've actually got in the room is people with autism, people with ADHD, ADD, etc. You know, with specific conditions. Who may or may not actually be diagnosed. So disclosure is another thing that needs to be considered. But in this instance, we're talking about people who are diagnosed and have disclosed that they are neurodivergent. And if you suspect there's some neurodivergence in your team, but you don't necessarily know, you can still employ certain interventions to help your team members to feel more at home, even if there is no transparency about the neurodivergent condition itself. And what we're doing really with neuro-inclusion in the diversity, equity and inclusion strategy is to think about the neurotypes and how we can make them feel more welcome. You know, what do we do to make them feel part of the business? And to harness their skills and to create this engaged, productive and innovative workforce. We look at, you know, ways to give them opportunities to have a voice and to share their experiences, to tell their stories. And that space could be virtual or it could be face-to-face. What we do is we create an environment, number one, firstly, that is conducive to having conversations which are honest and transparent. And for that to happen, you need to have a culture which allows that to take place. Often what organizations will try to do is create these conversations and interactions artificially, which will not work, because if you're corralling people into a room, neurodivergent or neurotypical, and saying, let's sit down, no matter what's gone on today, no matter what your relationship is with your manager, no matter what your employee experience is day to day, even if it's negative, we want you to have an open and honest conversation here. No judgments, just tell us. And then you go back to the not so perfect world outside of this room. And we all know that that isn't going to work, because people are not, they're not foolish, they're not stupid. They know when an environment is culturally accepting and when it's not. So the first thing to do is to have a culture which allows for conversations to take place, transparent, honest and open conversations to take place, and for the sharing of stories to be validated. And not only asking people to share stories, because often when these spaces are created, also for other groups with different characteristics, like women's groups or ethnicity, like if you've got an Afro-Caribbean group or a group for LGBTQ plus, they will often be asked for their views and their experiences, to share their stories without any kind of understanding of what's going to be done with that story, whether there's a culture of trust, whether they are psychologically safe to have those conversations, to share those stories. And that's, not an ideal way to start off such an initiative. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that your culture is conducive and receptive to having those honest conversations. And then what you do is you create the space. Once you've established that you have a culture that's going to make it work, you create a virtual or a face-to-face or both space where you can have those open and honest conversations about neuro-inclusion, where people may actually start to disclose whether they've done so formally or not. And the typical way to do that is to have an ERG. So you will have an employee resource group, which is dedicated to neurodivergence, which is quite a big term and can encompass a number of different, groups. So you may have one that's overarching, but then you might have specific subgroups around autism, ADHD, dyslexia, etc., or you may just take a collective approach. And what that does is mandate and validate their experiences by creating a forum for them to have those conversations. But what's more important than just creating the space, virtual or face-to-face, is to actually have it as part of the DEI strategy. So many times you will see ERGs, employee resource groups, being part of a DEI strategy, an overall DEI strategy. And that will, sort of feed into that. And those conversations will be considered, they'll be listened to, and they'll be responded to. So I have seen ERGs that have not worked very well. And what often happens is it will be created, it will become a talking shop, and then very little is done as a result of those conversations or that forum being created. Whereas the best ERGs, the one I've seen work really well, are mandated by the organization, validated by leadership, included in the DEI strategy, listened to, considered, and responded to. So the idea is that the feedback, the stories, the experiences heard in those forums are acted upon in a positive way and responded to constructively. So you will often get some controversial comments, some negative comments for sure, but you may also get some positive feedback too. So it's just nice to have, the good with the bad, take it all and act upon it. And they can be very, very useful ways for both neurodivergent people and leadership to understand each other's experiences, and also to know what to do in order to help them, because it's difficult to know, unless you give them a voice, unless you allow them to share ideas about what it is they need, and what support it is that will help them to do a good job and for them to do their best work. You need to be able to give them the room and the space to have that voice, to voice their opinions. So ERGs are a great way to do that, but they very much need to be part of the DEI strategy and mandated by leadership, and validated by the DEI strategy, which will listen to and consider the feedback provided. So that's one of the ways that you can begin to make neuro-inclusion a reality. You want to ultimately create an environment and a culture which helps neurodivergent people to do their best work. So you're looking to harness their skills, use their talents to amplify their voice for the good of the organization and obviously for the good of the individuals themselves. Many neurodivergent people have unique skills which can easily be harnessed in any kind of organization or working environment. But it's really important that there's a basic understanding of how neurodivergence plays out or presents in a workplace setting, in an office, typically where most of us work, in open plan offices, which can sometimes be challenging for neurodivergent people, autistic people in particular. So we encourage conversations, we create spaces, we build gaps between different functions and organizations, and we encourage cross business collaboration, and conversations to take place, because that's where you can make the most difference by having relationship building across the business, which doesn't necessarily sit in a silo. So often you will get subcultures where in one particular business unit, they are doing neuro inclusion or DEI very well. And in another part of the business, it will be really quite woeful and quite poor in comparison. But when you have cross business, cross function collaboration, and relationship building encouraged, then you can begin to see the gaps and to bridge those gaps by seeing what good looks like, and how to improve. And that can be done very nicely and very cheaply by fostering a culture of collaboration. So you create spaces, you encourage collaboration, and you encourage people to identify gaps and to look at where DEI, neuro inclusion in particular, is being done well. So you reward collaboration too. That's one of the things that is often missing in DEI. There's a lot of noise and a lot of fuss around doing things like ERG, setting up groups, setting up programs, celebrating particular events like Pride or Autism Week, National Autism Week, or Black History Month, which is just around the corner in October, and you'll start seeing things appear on social media, particularly LinkedIn, where organizations are doing a lot in a very short space of time and then nothing for the rest of the year. But actually what you need to do is reward the culture, the general culture of neuro inclusion. So where you see those good things happening in the business units that are doing neuro inclusion well, you celebrate them, you talk about them, and you share those experiences and those stories. You showcase the talents of neurodivergent employees, your neurodivergent team members and colleagues. If you see them doing good work, you talk about it, and you have a conversation with them about whether they are willing to share their experiences of being neurodivergent, of being autistic or an ADHD, and how that feeds into their everyday working experience. What you don't want to do is force people to share their stories, because that's going to have a detrimental effect, obviously, on the individuals involved. What you want to do is create a culture where it feels good to share, and you feel as though you are listened to, and it's worth, having those conversations about your experiences. And that is rewarded. So you reward, cross-functional, cross-business unit collaboration, and relationship building that helps the organization to improve. If you see really good case studies or experiences of where neurodivergent people have done fantastic work just because their profiles are understood well, then that's really something to celebrate. And it's not rocket science. It's all about understanding individuals and being mindful of how neurodivergence plays out in the workplace. And I'm a real fan personally of working very closely with people managers in regard to personal development. So employee experience really is in the hands of people managers, and the neurodivergent employees' experience of working in an organization or a company will very much be influenced. I'd say 90% of what they experience day to day will be influenced heavily by the person that they report into. So I like to look to people managers and leaders in particular too, to understand more about neurodivergence. It's their responsibility to understand their team members, bearing in mind that the approximately 15% of the population is neurodivergent, vast majority of that being autism or autistic. So I think it's about 7% of the population is autistic, currently in the UK at least. I don't know what the figures are globally, but I would imagine it's quite similar. You will have neurodivergent people in your organization, whether or not you know it, whether or not it's been documented formally, they will be there. And so when we talk about people managers, I'm also talking about leaders to take responsibility for their own personal development. And part of that being, a very important part of that being, to understand their team members. And as part of that, to understand neurodivergence and how it plays out in the organization they work for and within their team. So, you promote this culture of learning, continuous development, and understanding, how neuroinclusion is a pivotal part of the employee experience and will, in fact, benefit everyone, even though I said earlier that, we don't want to just generalize and say it's for everyone. In fact, if you have a neuro-inclusive culture, it's of benefit to everyone in the organization, not just neurodivergent employees. And really, in summary, what I wanted to say, and do ask any questions before the conversation ends, put forward any questions in the chat. In conclusion, what I really want to say is that it's important to think about neuroinclusion in the setting that you're in. So I have a lot of conversations about neurodivergence that are considered to be otherworldly, or in another place, or in another setting, or in a home setting, or particularly at school. There's many conversations about children who are neurodivergent, but at the end of the day, neurodivergence doesn't end with childhood. It carries on into adulthood, and therefore they're within any environment where adults exist, neurodivergence will exist. So in summary, what I'd like to say is, when you're in your workplace, in your organization, and you're looking around at the people who you work with, your colleagues, your managers, your leaders, think about neurodivergence in regard to behaviors in the workplace, and try not to place any judgment on certain behaviors straight away. Think about behaviors, think about presentations through the lens of neurodivergence, and consider how you can create interventions, positive interventions that are aligned with your DEI strategy, that will help your neurodivergent colleagues, leaders, people managers, and team members to feel more comfortable, more welcome, more at home, and enabled to do the best work possible. And all of that will increase engagement, will foster productivity and a really rocket launch innovation. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. You can contact me via DM if you prefer. I apologize if something has gone wrong. I haven't received any questions in the chat, so either no one submitted a question live or something isn't working, but apologies if you are not able to submit a question. You can always contact me via DM, or you can email me at kateasiche@wheretolookcomms.co.uk. And you can also reach me via my LinkedIn profile at Kate Asiche. You can visit my website too for more information on neuro-inclusion and creating a neuro-inclusive culture. That's wheretolookcomms.co.uk. There are quite a few free resources there, including a white paper and some videos too of other LinkedIn Live events I've done, and workshops and panel discussions on neurodivergence and creating a neuro-inclusive culture. So there's a lot of information that I can share with you. And if you're interested in my coaching, my training, I have an online training program too for organizations to help them to create a neuro-inclusive culture. Please reach out to me and I'll give you more details on that. But the starting point is my website, which has a hell of a lot of information on there. So thank you all for joining. I'm really pleased to have had this opportunity. And yeah, I hope it's been helpful, and speak to you all soon. Bye.